Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Hello and welcome to the movie edition of the GSMC SciFi Podcast. As you know, we are currently in the process of getting a new host next week. Yay! And so today we are bringing you two segments of episodes from the GSMC Movie Podcast, hosted by Staci. I also occasionally sit in on that podcast. So today we'll be looking at young adult sci-fi movies. We'll be starting with A Wrinkle in Time and then moving on to The Darkest Minds. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get to that episode.
So I will just come right out and say I read this book as a child and hated it.
How old of a child were you?
I was about 12 or so.
Okay, so about the right age. I did not read this book as a child, and because I totally judged a book by its cover, and my father's a librarian, so he would be very unhappy to hear me say that. But the book in our library had this like weird alien, big-headed creature-y thing on it, and it freaked me out. And I wasn't really into science fiction at the time, and so I was just like, no, I'm not going to read it. And then I finally read the whole series a few years ago, actually, as an adult. So, I can't say what I would have thought of it as a child.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember I read the first one, and only the first one, because I didn't like it anywhere near enough to try and continue. And then there was a made-for-TV movie about 15 years ago or so, and I think I watched about the first half hour, hoping that the movie version would somehow be better. And I don't remember much about it, except I didn't watch the rest of it. So clearly, I did not think that was the case. Mm-hmm. So going into this movie, I was iffy on it. I was like, okay, look, I know I don't like this story, and I've tried it a couple of different ways and didn't like it. But I was intrigued by the cast with Oprah and Reese Witherspoon and Mindy Kaling.
Yes. Plus the just the main family itself is very diverse, with a mixed race couple and their mixed daughter, and then they adopt a little boy who is maybe Asian,
Asian or Latino. I couldn't tell
yeah,
either.
He's very cute, Charles Wallace. It doesn't matter what ethnicity he is. Right. It's just they're a lovely family in terms of their diversity.
Right.
And, they look like. Because we do have more families nowadays that look like they look in the movie, and so it's nice to see that represented. And I loved that the cast was just so diverse overall.
I liked it too, except for one part, and I can tell that the diverse casting was definitely on purpose. Mm-hmm. But there's one part, the main girl's parents both work for NASA, and they're astrophysicists or something, and they're giving a presentation to NASA. And the audience for that was immensely diverse, which, yes, I totally love that. But I'm like, that's not realistic. I'm sorry.
Right.
That I can't buy that, because you got unless you were giving this in, maybe the UN or a council on African science or something. I was just like, there is no way that audience is as diverse as you made, which I'd love it to be, but that's not what's going on here. And it kind of took me out, which is interesting in this strange, very strange fantasy world, that's what took me out of it.
Yes. So if you're unfamiliar with the movie or the book, it's a little hard to describe.
Very hard to describe.
Because the young woman who is the main character, her parents are both scientists, and The original book was in the 60s or 70s. I don't remember which, and so they've obviously updated some things for that. But her father is working on what he calls a tesseract, which is kind of creating a fold in space to enable you to travel incredible distances at very little time. So it's a little bit science fiction. It's a little bit fantasy because it turns out a tesseract involves using your mind, which is science fiction, but also kind of verges on magic.
Right.
And he disappears in the movie. So it's just, what is the young woman's name?
Meg.
Thank you. Meg and Charles Wallace, her little brother, and their mom. And Meg is bullied at school and she's just having a really rough time of it. And then things develop where they meet these three interesting characters played by Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon, and Mindy Kaling, the Mrs. What's-It, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which.
Yes.
And they go on this adventure, and Charles Wallace, being 6, understands things a lot better than Meg, who is having a lot of adolescent angst.
Right. And they're also accompanied by a friend from school, Calvin.
Yes.
I gotta say also, Tesseract also took me out of the movie just because my first thought was, wait, when did we hop into a Marvel film? So afterwards I had to look up what a Tesseract was. Not sure it's like either this film or the Marvel films portray it as. It seemed to be like the fourth dimension of a cube or something.
Yes, and actually some of that is explained more in the book, which you probably just blocked from your childhood.
Blocked so much of this.
Yes, but they also, so the three characters, the Mrs. characters, kind of represent the light. There's a lot of themes of light and dark in this movie, and then the dark is just referred to as the it.
Yes.
Which kind of makes sense, and the it really does influence all of our darker characteristics. So they're the things that make us doubt ourselves. The it is definitely that voice in your head that tells you suck.
I mean, this film, unfortunately, doesn't help me understand the story any better. Like, when they can't be with the missus when they're on the dark planet, so they have to go on their own. But then where's Charles Wallace? But then the children with the balls and the ladies, but then the guy on the beach. Like, there was a lot of just like, what is going on here? And how did we get here? And why are we doing the things we do? Which I'm sure is, explained probably in the book in like Meg's head. But when you're watching a movie, it doesn't really come across why they're doing a lot of what they're doing. Because you don't have that inner monologue. So it's just like, what?
Well, I think the scene with the children and the balls, and to describe it for people who haven't seen the movie, it's a very sort of Stepford Wives scene.
Yes.
You've got all these children standing in their driveways on a street, typical kind of suburban street, and they're all bouncing the same ball at the exact same time. And then their mothers come out, they all have the same hair, and they all say, "Darling, come in for dinner," or something like that at the exact same time. And I think, if I'm remembering right, it's just representative of how this world is so far under the control of the it that everyone conforms to the same thing. There's no individuality. There's no... I don't remember exactly. But,
yeah, it was a lot.
That nothing really is real in this world, per se.
Yeah. And I mean... Again, I can't remember, and I'm pretty sure I'm just repressing the memory of trying to watch the TV movie version. But it could not have looked as good as this film does, because just technologically, we've advanced so much in the past 15 years or so. This film does look pretty awesome, and clearly
it's beautiful.
The designers, particularly the costume and hair and makeup designers, were really told just sort of go for it.
Yes, especially with the missus.
The missus looks so interesting, and they like every time they go to a different place, they have a costume change.
But even Meg's clothes change.
Well, that was another thing that frustrated me. Meg and Calvin are both wearing like 3 layers of like a jacket and a shirt, and then a shirt under that, and those layers change with not so much continuity. So like Calvin at one point has his jacket, then doesn't have his jacket, then takes off his shirt and is running around in the shirt, and then when we see him later, totally has on both the outer shirt and the jacket, and I'm just like, what?
And yet Charles Wallace just remains in his little adorable sweater vest.
Right.
I hate to interrupt in the middle of talking about Charles Wallace's adorable little sweater vest, but we do have to take our first break of the podcast, so stay tuned, and when we come back, we'll be wrapping up the segment on A Wrinkle in Time, and then moving on to our segment on The Darkest Minds. Stay tuned, you're listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast. Before the break, Staci and I were talking about A Wrinkle in Time. More specifically, we were talking about Charles Wallace, who is adorable, and his adorable sweater vest. So let's go ahead and get back to that segment.
Charles Wallace is a very interesting character. Like, he has the sweater vest, he looks very prim and proper, he thinks way more than I think anyone. But there's also the scene where the school Meg goes to is called James Baldwin Middle School, which I don't think was in the book, and it probably has something to do with Ava DuVernay, who is the director. But there's a scene where Charles Wallace is sitting outside the principal's office where Meg's been called into because she's in trouble, and he's sitting with his legs crossed, and right next to him is a picture of James Baldwin sitting exactly that same way with his legs crossed. And I'm like, I feel you're trying to tell me something here, and I'm only sort of getting it because I only know certain things about James Baldwin, but okay. But I thought that was very interesting. I was like, okay, that has given me a definite sense of who Charles Wallace is right now.
Yes, and he's very precocious in the books. He's very, very, very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And then the book series, I mean, this isn't the book review podcast, but the book series goes on kind of like the Chronicles of Narnia, where you get some of the same characters, but then things change and it focuses on different characters during the different books, but kind of still battling that whole concept of the it and the darkness. Mm-hmm. So,
and I mean, I'm not the best with strange fantasy things of kids going off on strange adventures with no superstition. I have a problem with that with Miyazaki's films, or I'm just like, really, adults, nobody has a problem with
superstition or supervision.
Supervision. Did I say superstition? Yes. Also that. But in this, they're joined by Calvin, who just comes across them when they're out walking their dog, mm-hmm. and then Charles Wallace takes them to see Mrs. Who. Yes, who. I had to stop and think about which Mrs. that was.
Yes.
Calvin is very much like, oh, this is really strange, and this woman speaks in quotes, and then we wind up in this other world. Okay, cool. Yeah. He's very accepting. He very much goes along with it, but he's not an idiot.
No, he seems like an intelligent kid, but he's much more open than Meg is to these new adventures that they're going on.
I would be much more with Meg of like, we can't do this, and that's not a real thing, and what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, no, I hear you. I would have been like, no.
Right, yeah, what? We're not tesserating as a verb. And there's a scene where Mrs. Whatsit, played by Reese Witherspoon, turns into, and I really have no other way to describe this than a giant kale stingray bird. It's really, really hard to describe if you haven't seen it. And I don't even remember this part in the book at all, so I'm not sure how correct that is or not. But she turns into this giant kale stingray bird thing and takes the kids on her back to go flying. And it's just like, why? You just immediately, like, and that's the one time you actually see Meg decide to be really adventurous. She pushes off to go to actually float in the air first, and I'm just like, there's no sides on this stingray thingy. You could easily fall off. What? And why do we change into it since we just come back? What? Like, there's a lot, because again, it's a fantasy film, so there's the whole thing about the it, which has its own planet or whatever Cosmo. I don't remember what it's called.
Yes. Something with a K that I can't also remember.
Right. And they keep going to different planets trying to retrace the path that Meg's dad took so they can find him. And it's just like, okay, fine, I get we're on a different planet, and then a different planet, and then a different planet. So each of the planets are different, but it feels very out there at times. And it's just like, say for Meg, we're all a little way too calm about this. I get the missuses are from here, so fine. And Charles Wallace shows no problem with anything the missuses do. Missuses, by the way?
Yeah.
I don't know the plural of misses. I had to stop and think about that at the end of the movie. It's Mrs. whatevers. But it was just like, what is with this place and these people who, you know, even though the Mrs. all have, you know, rather wild makeup and hair, no one doesn't look human.
Right.
Everyone's human. It's not strange fantasy creatures. They're all humans or taking human form. So it's just like, it's...
Except when they're a giant kale stingray bird thingy.
Except for that. But and the flowers that talk color when we're at the giant kale stingray bird place.
Yes.
But except for that, like when they go to a different planet and they meet Zach Galifianakis has a character in here. Mm-hmm. And then they go to a different place and they have Oscar Pena who is in here. And all the people...
Very weird facial hair.
Yes.
No, that was the last episode. I was going to say that could be our theme, but then we talked about the mustache from the in our last episode.
Right.
Hercule Poirot.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of weirdness going on in this film that I just couldn't quite wrap my head around, even with the story. But I think even with all that weirdness, the performances were really good, I thought.
They were. And I don't know, the weirdness didn't really bug me. I just kind of went with it. Maybe because it was so visually stunning, but I loved that in the end it was all about love, and especially loving yourself. And Meg really has to learn some things about loving and forgiving herself and loving and forgiving others. And there's a lot, and that, you know, goes with the light and dark themes. But all you need is love. The Beatles were right.
I don't know. I mean, the Beatles were also kind of weird too. So,
yeah. And now that we've completed that segment on A Wrinkle in Time, we'll go ahead and move to the next film for this episode, The Darkest Minds.
So anyways, our first film today is The Darkest Minds.
Okay.
Which I just immediately knew was based off of a YA book. Haven't read it.
You just sensed it.
Couldn't have told you the author, whether the author was male or female. I was just like, that's a YA book. I can just already tell.
So who is the author?
I do not remember her name. But she is only a few years younger than me, and I think this book was published when she was like 25 or something, and I'm just like, well, I wasn't doing anything like that when I was 25. She's like, what have I been doing with my 20s? But so anyways, I knew it was based off of a book. I did not know it was based off of a series. And it is.
Yes, box set. There's at least 4.
Yeah, I think there's maybe 6. It was originally supposed to be a trilogy, and then I don't have a clue what's going on in that story.
That always happens if it's like fantasy or sci-fi. They're never just one book.
Right.
It just never works that way. I'm still looking for Alexandra Bracken is the author.
Yes. So this is based off of the first book in the series. And as such, the ending is clearly like, hey, this is of a series.
Right.
So the story does not end. Just immediately know that they clearly are like, first book in a series. We're going to do a series. Let's go on. But anyways, in this movie book story, there's a disease, and the acronym is IAAN, which stands for something adolescent, something.
AAN, okay.
But what ends up happening is 90% of the kids end up dead. And the 10% that don't end up dead end up having superpowers. And there's a whole color ranking system with the superpowers.
Of course. Okay. Makes sense.
Well, and I guess it comes from the kids themselves, because when they use their powers, their eyes like glow these colors.
Ooh.
So it's like, okay, we're not putting this color on you. That's the color you are. Anyways, so the lowest level is greens, who are just like really super intelligent. And then there are the blues, who have telekinesis. And then there are the golds, who can control electricity.
Okay.
And then there are the reds, who we later find out spit, blow, fire breathe out fire.
Dang.
Something. And then there are the oranges.
There's something above red? Jeez.
Right? That was my first thought. That was my thought. When we finally do see a red, I'm just like, and they have like, not only the colors, but there's ranking. So it's like, whatever, normal, slightly whatever. Reds are dangerous, and oranges are lethal. But I'm like, okay, but they kill people by breathing fire at them. I feel you messed that ranking up. Like, and in the same way, I feel that golds should actually be below blues, because if you just like, if there's no electricity, do golds have power? It's not clear if they could call down lightning from the sky, because
can they be taken?
Well, here's the thing. All the kids evidently can be taken out with white noise.
White noise?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we later get the explanation from a green that because people under the age of 17 can hear frequencies that adults can't. And so that's how we end up sort of controlling the kids, is that we have these guns that blow white noise rays at them or something.
Okay. So clarifying question, do they lose their powers after 17?
Not clear. Because when we start, the main character, Ruby, who as the older version is played by Amanda Stenberg? I don't think there's an I in there, but I keep wanting to say Steinberg. Mm-hmm. It starts when she's about 10, and then we jump 6 years, so she's 16. Yes. And I'm like, okay, so clearly, as we see when they start rounding up all the kids with powers, there are like teenagers who have these powers. What happened to them 6 years later? Do they still have the powers? I'm not clear on how old anybody is with powers when we get to the 6 years later point. Right. There's some of you who look like you could easily be above 18, but I'm not sure. Because we end up placing all the kids who lived in camps run by, this is set up by the president, his son is one of the first people who gains power.
There's always camps.
Well, and segregation by colors. They are actually separated.
I
realize, okay, I'm sure you're making a statement there, but I'm not sure if you meant to or not. But yeah, so the kids are all taken. And I'm immediately, like, when we start getting into Ruby breaks out of this camp, because of course she does. That's from the trailer. You see her running around with 4 other kids trying not to get captured. My first thought as we see this, I'm like, how does this work? Because we see very early on that most of these kids should actually be able to break out of this camp. How do you have camps full of powered kids that are only controlled by, a few dozen people with guns? I'm like, really?
Yeah, I feel like they should definitely band together and get out of those camps.
Yes. But so Ruby is an orange.
Although, are they armed with guns that shoot white noise? So maybe it's
not
quite as
still,
easy.
The blues can freaking, move things with their mind. I'm like, just take the gun out of their hands.
There you go.
What? I don't buy that all the kids are still in these camps. But anyways, let's just go with that they are. And of course, we want to escape. Ruby is an orange.
And of course, now I want to know, now I want to both see the movie and read the book to find out if the book explains any of this more clearly.
Yeah, I definitely want to see if the book explains it more clearly, because it is sort of like, I feel you definitely said more in the book, but we just don't have time in the movie. And so we have a wonderful little helpful colored pyramid that our wonderful Dr. Exposition explains to us so that the audience knows the basic premises of this.
Right.
And he clearly explains Ruby's an orange. We're not at first told why oranges are so dangerous, but they're supposed to be sort of killed on sight. Ruby ends up managing to convince the doctor to change her into a green. And so she lives out 6 years as a green. But again, considering the green, and it's so, again, continuing with what the heck is with
the
these
greens
camps?
are the super intelligent ones, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we march them around the camp to where they go into a factory and lace up boots. I don't know why. That's what you do with the really super intelligent kids, is you have them lacing up boots. Like, okay. But that's where we start with the movie. Ruby's pretending to be a green. She's lacing up the boots, but she's evidently doing it wrong. You're supposed to go over, and Ruby's going under. And there's
Ruby.
Yeah, there's another girl, another green next to her, who tries to defend her by telling the guard, no, they're supposed to go under because that makes them tighter. I feel there must be more about that backstory in the book. Like, who's this person who's helping defend you? Does she know you're not actually a green? Why is she standing up for you? Because she then gets dragged off And then we get a test, which ends up being the white noise test that I guess they do at times. But this one is somehow different. Somehow Ruby passes out, and when she wakes up, she's handcuffed to a bed and learns that, oh, they know you're an orange. They're going to kill you. So she is helped to escape by a doctor played by Mandy Moore, who's actually working for a secret organization that tries to rescue the kids from the camps to possibly train them to use their powers and or be an army. It's not clear. And of course, I'm sure that's probably explored in further books. We don't fully get the explanation.
Right.
Ruby escapes from the camp, but then later escapes from Mandy Moore and her coworker and runs into the other 3 kids that she ends up running around, which is Chubbs, who is a green, Zoo, who is a gold, and Liam, who is a blue. So you get almost the full color spectrum.
Oh, they should have at least one more. Come on.
Well, you can't have a red. The reds, they breathe fire.
But always? I mean, do they just breathe fire every time they exhale?
Well, it's not clear. And again, continuing with I'm not sure how you can control these kids at all, because they should have been able to escape like 100 times over. We later find out that pretty much all the reds are like used as controllable weapons by the government. Oh. And I'm just like, but how do you control them?
Darn
they
you, reds.
Breathe fire. Like it. What? I just the ability of this system to have ever functioned, period, but let alone for 6 years, feels very flimsy. I'm just like, why? Because we later find out from Liam's backstory that he helped basically all the kids at his camp escape by using his telekinesis to like bust open the camp's gates. And I'm just like, you should not ever be able to control like any blue. They have telekinesis. They can just like bust the door open. How do you have a camp full of blues? Just period. Just like, what? But so this is, as you said, a dystopian. There's a whole thing where while the kids are in these camps, the rest of the world has also sort of basically shut down. We get the explanation from Mandy Moore that since there were no kids, most people moved to the cities because no kids somehow equals no economy. I don't quite know how that works other than like, advertising to children, but
because we've only used them as the workforce, that's
right. Or the only money we spend is for kids. I'm just like, but what?
I think it was dystopian before it was dystopian.
Right.
And on that somewhat odd statement, we're going to go ahead and take our second break of the podcast. And when we come back, Staci and I will be wrapping up this segment on The Darkest Minds. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to this special movie edition of the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up this edition by concluding our segment on The Darkest Minds.
But so as you get these kids, they're running around non-city Virginia, and so everything's pretty deserted. They're at one point in an empty mall. At another point, they spend the night in what they think is an empty motel. It's just like, so there's not really anybody out on the road except for these kids and what are called tracers, which are people who hunt down children with powers because there are evidently bounties on them.
Makes sense,
because
sure.
we need them all in the camps that we somehow can keep them in. So there is a tracer named Lady Jane, who is played by Gwendolyn Christie,
I was gonna say, is she British? She's got to be British.
She again, I'm sure this must come up more in the book to explain the whole backstory with Lady Jane, because it feels sort of like you just randomly appeared here because we need an action scene. What the heck is going on here? So they're trying not to get caught by Mandy Moore and her doctor friend because they're not sure about their intentions. They're trying not to get caught by the tracers, but they're also trying to find this sort of magical, mystical place where supposedly kids who have escaped from camps have banded together to create essentially their own society, because the only people who can help these kids are the kids themselves. And so they're trying to find this place, and they go out on this road adventure dealing with all these different problems. So yeah, I was immediately like, yeah, this thing with the powers and the ranking and the controlling of, no. I was immediately like that. But then I also had a major problem with the love story triangle. I don't even know what to call it. There's a number of times.
Is it a triangle? Because can we not have a young adult series with no triangle? I mean, come on, it's a little overdone.
I'm not sure, and I'm not sure how this goes forward in the books. Continuing, I'm just like, I don't know where that storyline is going based off of where we end it. But there are a number of times where Ruby ends up in a sort of physical position where I'm like, this could easily go into like, you know, sexually inappropriate things. And yet she's very calm about it. There's one scene where she's just met the other three kids and they're traveling around and they spend the night at the abandoned hotel, motel, whatever. She takes a shower and then is getting out the shower, has a towel wrapped around her, and Liam knocks on the door to give her socks in the most awkward flirting way ever. But I'm just like, Ruby doesn't want to touch people because that's part of how she uses her powers. I'm like, chick, you are standing in a towel with the door fully open, talking to this guy you've just met for what goes on for what feels like a longer time. I'm like, I don't think you'd be that comfortable, person who's just spent 6 years in a, you know, prison camp where the guards seem very willing to like at least grab you by your hair. I'm just like, and then for someone who again doesn't want to touch people, the entire film she's wearing either 3/4 sleeves or short sleeve shirts. I'm just like, what are you doing? Because she actually, when they go to the mall, she picks out a whole new outfit, including a sweatshirt that she then, I'm not sure if the sweatshirt is already had 3/4 sleeves or she just scrunches them up. I'm just like, why?
Get some gloves too.
Like, I get this is, but I'm just thinking of like Rogue from X-Men.
I was just gonna say that.
I'm like, you are not, for someone who doesn't, and she specifically says this a couple of times to Liam, I don't, like, she backs away from him when he comes near her. She doesn't want to touch him. It's like, you are not running around with like your arms out like that. You're not. You had a choice not to be, and so you're definitely not. I cannot buy this. And that's one of the like problems I have with just the production period is like costume designer, that's not believable, but then also possibly writer or director or actors somewhere in there also not believable with like the special effects.
How come?
Because the special effects themselves, like CGI wise, actually look pretty okay. There's a scene in the trailer where Liam like pulls a tree onto the road to stop a car that's chasing them. And that looks fine. Like the actual pulling of the tree looks pretty believable. It's like the reactions of, you know, the people in the car behind them that I'm like, that was not well done. I'm sorry. Just like, could you not get better actors? There's just something about this film that feels like a little low budget.
They're chewing the scenery. They're acting so badly.
Well, just like that's not a believable reaction and or not believable direction. And that comes up a number of times because, again, these are kids with superpowers. So you do get things where they're supposed to, you know, react to things that aren't, of course, really there. And I'm just like, yeah, but even the adults aren't doing this well. So why? I don't know if this is because your actors aren't great or the director is not great or just, I'm just like, something in this when you get to these scenes where they're clearly acting against something that's not physically in front of them. I'm just like, you're taking me out of this film. And then you get later where there's a possible love triangle and I'm just like, again, she's way too comfortable. And there's a couple of times where like a guy ends up on top of her and I'm just like, would the
also
chick,
overdone,
right? I was like, would the chick who's just spent 6 years pretending to be a totally different ranking than she is, because if they knew what ranking she was they'd kill her, and B, doesn't want to touch anyone, gets really comfortable really fast after 6 years of that. I'm just like, no. My suspension of disbelief is a little off here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I wanted to like this film because I thought that the concept was pretty interesting, even if there's a part of me that I'm like, okay, I get, like in the same way with Divergent, where you split into the factions, that this is, this is how teenagers feel, because we always feel like, we're outsiders and no one understands us. And I'm like, yeah, but really? I don't think you ever are split into that clear cut of a category, that, I'm not like them, but I'm totally like these other people. It's like, I get we all want to find our tribe, but I don't know that most teenagers actually feel like they do. So this whole let's break people down into categories for every single thing, just like, I get, I wanted to approach it more like Harry Potter with the houses, but it felt more like Divergent, and I was just like, no.
Sadness.
And then it didn't end, and I'm just like, at the end of the movie, I was like, you're setting up for, I can tell about like 15, 20 minutes before I'm like, are you setting up for, you're setting up, why are you setting up for, and then found out later, it's a series.
Yep.
And it had this, and I've noticed this lately in a number of films I've seen, where there are parts in the trailers, and because I see a number of films, I end up seeing these trailers multiple times. There are parts in the trailers that are not in the film at all.
Oh, really?
Or they're done like differently, so it's like you used a different take. But in this one, there's a scene, and this is like one of the main things in the trailer, where she's talking to Chubbs, who's like, I'm smart enough to know you're hiding something, and you're smart enough to be hiding it. That never came up in the movie. And once we got to a point where I could kind of tell it probably should have come up based off of where the setting was, I was just like, I was really focused on that for some reason. I was just like, why did that never... Why do you put things in trailers that aren't in movies? Stupid advertising people. Like, are the people who cut the trailers not the same people who edited the film? Like, what the heck? It's a pet peeve, and continuing with the possible love triangle and not ending stories. I was just like, there's too many pet peeves and not enough good acting in this film. I'm annoyed. So I'm sad.
That's not good that your final conclusion is I'm annoyed.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I like Amanda Stenberg. I wanted to like this because, hey, kids with superpowers. I'm kind of all for that, but yeah. So I don't think this film was good enough to have a sequel, and not just like because I don't want things with sequels, just end stories, but also like financial wise, I'm not sure they're going to get enough of a box office to be like, yes, let's make another one.
It'll be interesting.
It'll be a bit like Aragon, where it's like, we did the one, and even though there's totally a book after this, no.
Several.
Yeah.
Oh, that movie was bad, though.
It was so bad.
Well, on that sigh-worthy note, we're going to conclude this episode of the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. You will definitely want to tune in next week because we have a new host and he will be starting. So next Monday's episode will feature new host Jay, and looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I know he's a big sci-fi fan, so join us on Monday for that, for the introduction of our new host. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a great week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.